Good evening, everyone. Those of you in the hall who have braved the elements to be in here tonight, thank you. Those at home, I think the last I looked this afternoon, we had 95 people registered for Vimalakirti, a man who is truly worthy of an audience. Yeah, so before we begin, since many of you are coming from your workaday world, to enter the sutras of the Mahayana, and especially to enter this sutra, we have to really let go of kind of the normal way we see things, and see if you can move into a mind that is free of concepts. Understand that imagination can, even though being somewhat fantastic, can also be deeply meaningful. And you'll see as we get into the sutra what I'm talking about. So by way of background, just to understand the context for this sutra. Again, sutras are a Sanskrit word, sort of means threads, the things that hold things together. And the Buddha's teachings are called sutras. And all Buddhist sutras begin with the words, "Thus I have heard." So they clearly identify that one of the Buddha's disciples was listening to this talk, and these talks that he gave were memorized for hundreds of years and passed on orally until they were finally written down. People used to have that ability to memorize and remember old capabilities of the mind, which we are losing quickly. So usually when you hear the word sutra, you basically expect that the main protagonist will always be the Buddha. And usually he'll be talking to somebody will ask him questions, he'll be in an historical setting. The Sutra of Vimalakirti is most unusual because Vimalakirti was a layman. So to have something called a sutra in which he is the main protagonist is highly unusual. So just an historical context also, over the hundreds of years, Buddhism came to, the Buddha was born and taught in India 6th century BC. And over the course of hundreds of years in India, his teaching spread, and he had thousands, hundred thousands, millions of followers, of which the core, going back to his own time, even though he taught lay people, the core around him were all monastics, primarily male monastics and also some female monastics. And as the centuries went on, the dominance of the monastic class, so to speak, or the monastic lifestyle, was pervasive in the Buddha Sangha. Anyway, I won't go into it. There's lots of, if you're interested in the history of development of Buddhism in India, you can read it. But basically, over the centuries, it became, according to many people, very rarefied. It broke. They all worked together, but they were in 16 different schools, different philosophical schools, and there were great universities. And because the holders of the Buddha's tradition were primarily monks, they have a certain path. And their path is really very much based on renunciation. Going back to the Buddha, right? The Buddha renounced his family obligations. He renounced his heritage, his caste. He gave up all his nice clothes, and he shaved his head, and he begged for his meals. It was basically, so the lifestyle of the practitioners over hundreds of years became more and more identified with renunciates, right? How do you deal with the suffering of the world? How do you deal with all the objects of desire, and how do you deal with all the complexities of lay life? Simple answer. Separate yourself from it. Renounce it. Live separately from. Don't get involved in. So you could see in terms of, some of the fundamental issues of human life, of desire and attachment and aversion, by being a renunciate, you kind of stepped out of all that and you had a very good answer, you see. The problem was, of course, that didn't really speak to the life of lay people. So you really began to have a very clear kind of hierarchy, as well as the ideal, the kind of enlightened ideal within the renunciate tradition was the arhat. And the arhat is very much like a solitary practitioner, somebody who is working deeply on himself, cutting himself off from all the sense pleasures and the sensory attachments, and very, leading a very powerfully introspective, meditative life. And the realization is of somebody who is completely cut off from all sensory involvements. Is that clear? That was the arhat, and that was the ideal of spiritual practice for the school of the elders, which was the dominant school. Again, not very motivating to people like us, to lay people, because really it meant if I really wanted to become a spiritually developed person, I would have to what? Renounce my family, renounce the householder life, and become a renunciate. So somewhere around 100 BC, 100 AD, a new movement developed. And they called themselves Mahayanas. Now, don't call people who are practicing Theravadan Buddhism Hinayanist. That's just like a Mahayanas term. Is that clear? Because Hinayanas means small vehicle, which means it's like a one-person car. It's a small vehicle. It's for me. It'll get me to enlightenment. Mahayana, Maha means great, was different. The ideal of the Mahayana was the Bodhisattva. The Bodhisattva is an enlightened being who, understanding his interdependence, her interdependence with all beings, has as their ideal to become an enlightened person and to rescue, save, liberate all beings. Right? So as opposed to a solitary, the ideal of the Bodhisattva includes everyone. Right? And because the Bodhisattva is not somebody who renounces the world in terms of the objects of the world, but basically renounces attachment to the world. So the Bodhisattva is somebody who's committed to entering the world to liberate beings as opposed to removing themselves. Is that, that's very quick. All right? Now, at the same time that the Mahayana developed, all of a sudden came into being these Mahayana sutras in Sanskrit. Where'd they come from? Where have they been? Okay, because when you hear them, they're very different than the Buddhist sutras, as you will see. Because the Buddhist sutras of what are called suttas, that's preserved in the Pali Canon, are very personal. It's like the Buddha responding to somebody's questions, and the whole audience are all monks and nuns and some lay people. But it's a very small little universe. Mahayana Sutras, much bigger, as you will see. And so the question becomes, well, where'd these come from? And so, there are different answers, but it really doesn't matter because as you listen, they are highly enlightened. Mahayanas say, well, the Buddha taught these things. He taught these teachings. These things happened during his time, but he only taught them for those who could really understand. So it was passed down orally for hundreds of years until it was written down around the 1st century AD. And there are other. The bottom line is, as you'll see, they are the expression of the enlightened mind. Okay, so that's now. So there are half a dozen great. There are lots of Mahayana sutras. There are several which are considered very great, of which the Vimalakirti is one of them. It was especially beloved in China, where it had several translations from the Sanskrit, and also very much practiced and loved, and even got into the kind of the culture of the time, as you'll see why, of Japan and Korea. Not so. It was known within the Tibetan system and translated, but not so central to their practice, nor I think to Vietnam and Southeast Asia. So, are you ready? And I wrote you that I was going to do the Watson translation. What did they say? You can't change horses midstream? Well, I changed horses before I got into the stream. So I was looking at them both today, and I've always read the Watson because it kind of reads well, but the Thurman, Bob Thurman's, is I think much closer. It's a much truer translation to the meaning. Okay, so I've switched to the Thurman translation. So they're chapters, and the first chapter is called Purification of the Buddha Field. And this starts out the same way, thus I have heard at one time. The Lord Buddha so they always start out, sort of giving the place. The Lord Buddha was in the garden of Amrapali in the city of Vasali, attended by a great gathering. This is a historical city, Vasali. It's very interesting, just parenthetically. Amrapali, so many of the the Buddha taught in the bamboo grove. He taught in many places that were donated to him. Amrapali was a courtesan. It's very interesting. Was a courtesan, a very famous courtesan, the most famous courtesan of the Lichavi kingdom, and actually had sort of a royal designation because she was so beautiful, and her arts were so sought after. By men, they would actually get into fights. So basically, she was sort of made a national treasure. Those were different times. But she was still a courtesan. And so she, at some point, heard the Buddha's teachings, heard the Buddha teach, and was so moved by it that she was quite wealthy. She became a disciple of his. And donated this grove where he was staying. It's very interesting. So, the Buddha didn't take political stands. He lived it. So there's a very kind of well-known story where she comes to the Buddha and she invites him to come to her home to take a meal, to offer him a meal. A little scandalous, you see, because even though she was a royal courtesan, that still was a profession that was not, anyhow, a little controversial. And on the way, after she invited him, she was going back toward town, and she ran into a whole bunch of these kind of wealthy, high-end people, right? And she said, well, where are you going? I mean, they all knew her, but they probably wouldn't just admit it. He said, well, we're going to invite the Buddha to come to our home tonight. We want to offer him a meal. And she said, well, he's already accepted my invitation. And they were scandalized. And they offered her gold right then and there to give up her invitation and give it to them. And she wouldn't accept it. And then when they were the Buddha, they said they'd give the Buddha a great offering of gold if he would come to their home instead of hers. And he wouldn't do it. He went to her home. So that gives you a little sense of where he was at. So he was in her garden in the city of Vasali, tended by a great gathering. Of bhikkhus, which were monks, there were 8,000. Okay, and this is before electronic amplification. Okay, there were 8,000. Their minds were free of impurities, afflictions, all attained self-mastery, liberated mind, calm, dignified. They had accomplished everything. They had done what they needed to do, cast off all burdens, destroyed all the bonds of existence. They were perfect in their mind control, okay? So there were 8,000 in the gathering. So do we have room in this hall for them? Let's bring them in. Imagine they're here with us. There were 32,000 great bodhisattvas. And actually down the line, he names a lot of them. Spiritual heroes, bodhisattvas, universally acclaimed, super knowledges, guardians of the Dharma. They upheld the true Dharma. And their great teachings resounded like a lion's roar throughout the 10 directions. The lion's roar is a very famous metaphor in Buddhism because it was said that in the jungle, when the lion roared, there was all the animals were quiet. You know, the lion's on the prowl, and there would be absolute silence in the jungle. So it was considered the lion's roar of the Dharma, the lion's roar of the Buddha would silence the ignorant mind. It would just be because when the Buddha taught the Dharma, everything would be silent. Without having to be asked, they were natural spiritual benefactors of beings. They maintained unbroken the succession of the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, conquering all egoistic foes. Their mindfulness, intelligence, realization, meditation, eloquence were perfected. So this gives you a little definition of what a great being is. They were free of all obscurations, emotional involvements, living in liberation without impediment, totally dedicated to the perfections of generosity, subdued, unwavering, morality, tolerance, effort, meditation, wisdom, skill in liberative technique, commitment, power, and realization. They were stamped, they turned the irreversible wheel of Dharma, they were stamped with the insignia of signlessness. So these are all characteristics of a mind that is beyond all characteristics. They were expert in knowing the spiritual faculties of living beings. That's us. That was their expertise. They understood us. They understood where we were at. Their voices were perfect in diction and resonance, and they were versatile in speaking in any language. They spoke fearlessly like lions, sounding the thunder of the magnificent teachings. Unequaled, they surpassed all measure. They were the best captains for the voyage of the discovery of the treasures of the Dharma, the stores of merit and wisdom. They were expert in the way of the Dharma, straight, peaceful, subtle, gentle, hard to see, difficult to realize. Endowed with wisdom, they understood the thoughts of all living beings, as well as their comings and goings. On and on and on. They were inexhaustible minds of limitless virtues, and they glorified enormous Buddha fields with the splendor of their virtues. Beautiful, eh? I mean, I'm just kind of picking, but this is sort of a description of these great beings that we're now gathering. In addition to the 32,000 bodhisattvas, there were 10,000 Brahmins, of which was the head of the god Brahma. They had come from all the various universes to see and serve the Buddha and hear with their own mouth. There were 12,000 chakras from various four-sector universes, many other powerful gods. And there were all these, in the mythology of India, all these various kinds of beings that live in all these different realms. They were all there, represented. So it was a big gathering. Probably, like a football stadium full on a Sunday? But for different purposes, different times. Finally, don't take this personally, finally, there was the fourfold community. Bhikshus, bhikshunis, laymen, and laywomen. So we're sort of like an afterthought. Can you see? There are all these great beings who live in this enlightened world with enlightened aspirations and enlightened realizations, only living for the cultivation of wisdom and compassion, only wanting to benefit beings in all kinds of miraculous ways, right? And then there's us. But at least we were invited, so I think that's good. And then next comes these 500 Lichavi. Lichavi was this republic. It was actually a republic in India at the time where they actually elected their government. So there was democracy back then. So there 500 Lichavi youths, each carrying a parasol. Anyhow, the Buddha does this incredible magic feat. He takes their 500 parasols and he turns it into one gigantic parasol in which the whole universe, in its jewel-like splendor, is revealed. Right? The whole universe is revealed in its jewel-like splendor. And people are just, right? Everybody could see this. All the various realms. This could clearly be seen by everyone, and the voices of all the Buddhas of the 10 directions could be heard proclaiming the teachings of Dharma in all the various worlds, the sounds reverberating in the space beneath this great, precious canopy. And then the young Richavi, Ratnakara, he knelt his right knee in the ground and he recites a beautiful, spontaneous sort of ode to what he's just experienced and to the Buddha. And then Ratnakara, having celebrated the Buddha with the verses, says, Lord, these 500 young Lichavis are truly on their way to unexcelled perfect enlightenment, and they have a question. And the question is, how do bodhisattvas purify a Buddha field? Please explain how a bodhisattva purifies this Buddha field. All right, so, and this is what we'll hear about now. So this is a famous kind of saying in Buddhism, that all Buddhas and bodhisattvas purify a Buddha field. And they want to know, what does this mean? Okay? The Buddha said, a Buddha field of bodhisattvas is a field of living beings. So this is very important. The Buddha field in which bodhisattvas live and act and manifest are not in some alternative world, not in some heavenly realm. The Buddha field that a bodhisattva purifies is the world of living beings. Okay? Which means what? For want of a better word, our world. So Buddhas and Bodhisattvas manifest in our world to create a Buddha field. Okay. A Bodhisattva embraces a Buddha field to the same extent that he causes the development of beings. Embraces a Buddha field to the same extent that living beings becomes disciplined. And now he goes through a whole list of all the various ways that these bodhisattvas create the basis of the transformation of beings, that this world becomes a field of Buddhas, right? So a field is a place where things grow, like a farmer has a field. So with that kind of analogy, bodhisattvas are what? They're farmers. They're skilled in growing, like a good farmer. What are they growing? They're growing us into becoming enlightened beings. That's what they're up to. That's what they're up to. Okay, and that's their skill. Yeah, so, it's he goes on and on and on. So, a bodhisattva's Buddha field is a field of positive thought, free of hypocrisy and deceit. Anybody who lives free of hypocrisy and deceit can be born into a bodhisattva's Buddha field. So, please understand, we're not talking about necessarily physical birth. Anybody who transforms their thinking mind into a mind that has positive thought, that lives free of hypocrisy and deceit, will be born into a Buddha field. The Buddha field is a field of high resolve. It's a virtuous application. A bodhisattva's Buddha field is the magnificent of the conception of the spirit of enlightenment. It's a field of generosity, giving away possessions. When living beings give away their possessions, they're born in a Buddha field. When they follow the path of the 10 virtues and morality with positive thoughts, they're born in a Buddha field. When they attain enlightenment, living beings with the transcendence of tolerance, discipline, all the superior meditative practices will be born into the Buddha field. Mindfulness, awareness, they get born into a Buddha field. It goes on and on. This is, if you think about the minds that created this, it just goes on and on with all the various minds that gets one born in a Buddha field. Liberative technique, activity. Goes on and on. 10 virtues. Anyhow, let me just summarize, okay? So basically, it's sort of like somebody who's always thought, well, the purpose of my religion is so I can be reborn in heaven, in heavenly realms. And what goes on in heavenly realms? I don't know. What goes on in heavenly realms? The angels are singing all day, right? Beautiful angelic music all the time. And you eat angelic food and you float around on clouds, and right? Heaven. So people of the time could have sense Buddha fields, Buddha lands are places that are very special. But what the Buddha is saying, no, is Buddha lands are when people wake up all aspects of their Buddha mind. That's how they enter the Buddha land. That's how they enter, that's being born into the field of a Buddha. Is that clear? So see, he's not saying anything about renouncing the world, is he? He's not saying anything about turn away from relationships or turn away. He's talking about the cultivation of all the inherent, enlightened, wholesome, positive aspects of mind. That's the practice. Is that clear? Now, obviously, you might say, well, isn't that how we practice? But the root of that are texts like this, you see. This took Buddhism in a new direction than it had been going. So while this may sound very beautiful to you, at the time it's a very radical teaching. And you can see why this sutra was so much loved by lay people, right? Because it showed them that the path of awakening and transformation, the path of being born into the field of a Buddha, right, was available to anyone who transforms, the actions of their body, speech, and mind. So it's very, 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 very positive. So we have the Buddha doing this miraculous thing, right? Taking all the parasols and making this gigantic jewel parasols in which all worlds are reflected, and it's this incredibly vision. He basically then answers their questions about, how does a Buddha, create a Buddha field, and he says this through all these practices and realizations. Then, thereupon, the Buddha magically influenced the Venerable Sariputra. Now, who is Sariputra? Anybody know who Sariputra is? Who is Sariputra? One of the great monks, monastic disciples of the Buddha, Sariputra. We have him in our sutras, right? Sariputra. All of a sudden, Sariputra, the great, almost like saint within the Buddhist tradition, well, you'll hear him. Now, at least it says, the Buddha magically influenced and planted, it's sort of like he magically took over Shariputra's mind and had him ask this question. It's like, like a magician having a plant or something, I want you to ask me that question. So he says, if the Buddha field is pure to the extent of the mind of the Bodhisattva being pure, right, then when Shakyamuni, which means the Buddha, this is talking right to him, was engaged in the career of being a Bodhisattva, his mind must have been impure. Otherwise, how could this world look so impure? Right? I mean, do you understand what he's saying? He's saying, all right, so when a Buddha appears, a Bodhisattva, like the Buddha before he became a Buddha, he did all this work in this field, and if the field is a reflection of his own mind, then the Buddha must have had a very impure mind, because look around, this world is just filled with impure beings. I mean, it's a good question. When you grant it, it's like, what are you talking about? Right? I mean, we heard that the Buddha's been a bodhisattva in this realm lifetime after lifetime in the Jataka tales, and yet it's still a mess. So what is this thing about, creating, pure lands or Buddha lands? All right. The Buddha, knowing telepathically the thought of Venerable, no, I'm sorry. This was his thought. Forgive me. So this was a thought that Sariputra had, you see. He wouldn't say it out loud in front of the Buddha, but he was thinking this to himself. So the Buddha, telepathically knowing what Shariputra was thinking about, he says, what do you think, Shariputra? Is it because the sun and the moon are impure that those blind from birth do not see them? This is how they teach. Rather than just giving him a direct answer, he uses like a little analogy, like, what do you think, Sariputra? I mean, is there something wrong with the sun and moon because a blind person can't see them? So he makes Shariputra do the work. You see? He doesn't just give him the answer, he makes him do the work. And Shariputra says, no, it's not so, Lord. The fault lies with those blind from birth, and not with the sun and the moon. Everybody clear? Oh. The Buddha declared in the same way, Sariputra, the fact that some living beings do not behold the splendid display of the virtues of the Buddha field of the Tathagata, the Buddha, is due to their own ignorance. It's not the fault of the Buddha. Shariputra, the Buddha field of the Tathagata, which was another appellation of the Buddha, it means the thus come one, is pure, but you don't see it. So this is another very powerful teaching, right? In Zen, in Dzogchen, because the fundamental teaching is everything is just as it is pure, undefiled, uncontaminated, just as it is. And it is only beings' minds, because of their delusions and their projections, do not see what's right in front of them. Okay? And that's what he's saying to Shariputra, his main Arhat disciple. I mean, he's making Sariputra the fall guy. And he's making him the spokesperson for the lesser vehicle, right? In which the world is what? Impure. If we want purity, we have to what? Leave the world and go to our own little, renunciate island where we create a very pure world, right? Like a monastic institution, nobody deals with money, and nobody has property, and everybody's got a head shaved, and we hold everything in common, and we don't have relationships, and we, right? And the Buddha says, no. It's because your mind, it's right here, but it's your mind that doesn't see it. The Buddha field is pure, but you don't see it. And then the Brahma Shikim said to the Venerable Sariputra, Reverend Sariputra, do not say the Buddha field of Shakyamuni or Tathagata is impure. The Buddha field is pure. And I can see the splendid expanse of the Buddha field as equal to the splendor of the abodes of the higher deities. And then the Venerable said to the Brahma god, but I'll be honest with this are my own words. But I'll be honest with you, Brahma. I see this great earth. I see it with its highs, its lows, its thorns, its precipices, its peaks, its abysses, as if it was entirely filled with order. How do you pronounce it? O-R-D-U-R-E? Sort of like, what is it like? Fecal matter or manure, something, odor, O-R-D-U-R-E? No. Anyway, yeah, but it has a meaning, but it's just filled with filth. Maybe that's what it is. Very interesting. So, does it sound like us? Many people look at the world and it's just filled with, right? We don't see it as a pure vessel. Is contaminated and dirty and filled with ignorance and stupidity and filth. And you go up in Nebraska Avenue and people go, "Ooh, Nebraska Avenue, why would anybody want to live on Nebraska Avenue? It's so filthy. It's not beautiful." Right? You know what I'm saying? But that's just the mind creating that. It's hard to believe that Nebraska Avenue is as perfect as, what's the one along the bay? Bayshore. Just to bring it for those of us who live in Tampa. Right? I don't want to be on Nebraska. I want to get down to Bayshore. Yeah, but that's because we see with the mind that makes certain things clean and certain things unclean, and certain things beautiful and certain things ugly, and certain things desirable and certain things undesirable. And we think they're real, but they're just projections of our mind. Right? In truth, everything is equal and perfect just as it is. So Sariputra says to him, no, I see this world, it's filled with filth. And so the Brahma Shikin says, the fact that you see such a Buddha field as this, as if it was impure, is a sure sign that there are highs and lows in your mind, and that your positive thought in regard to the Buddha awakening is not pure either, or the Buddha gnosis, he says, or the Buddha understanding the nature of things is not pure either. Sariputra, those whose minds are impartial toward all living beings and whose positive thoughts toward the Buddha wisdom are pure, see this Buddha field as perfectly pure. At that moment, the Buddha, I'm just imitating. The Buddha touched the ground with his big toe. Everybody paying close attention. He touched the earth, not with his hand like he did when he came to enlightenment, just with his big toe. And suddenly it was transformed into a huge mass of precious jewels, a magnificent array of hundreds of thousands of clusters of precious gems, until it resembled the universe of this great Buddha land called something or other. Everyone in the entire assembly was filled with wonder, each perceiving themselves seated on a throne of jeweled lotuses. Can everybody online and everybody here in the hall just imagine you are sitting on a jeweled lotus in one of the great Buddha lands, and everything is just absolutely wondrous. Just for a moment. You can close your eyes, because it is, to close your eyes and enter the world imagination is to realize this is the realm of mind. And so just imagine all of a sudden, all the way we characterize the world is dropped away, and we're sitting in this total pureness, sitting on a jewel throne. Everything is perfect, wondrous, just the way it is. All the sounds we hear are the sounds of the Buddha. All the things we see are emanations of the Buddha. Enlightened beings everywhere. When the splendor of the beauty of the virtues of this Buddha field shone forth, 84,000 beings conceived the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. And the 500 Licchavi youths who would accompany the young Licchavi Ratnakara all attained the conformative tolerance of ultimate birthlessness. Then the Lord withdrew his miraculous power, and at once the Buddha field was restored to its usual appearance. And then men and gods who subscribe to the disciple vehicle thought, alas, all constructed things are impermanent. Now, I think many of us have had moments brought upon by different circumstances where even just for a brief moment, the veil of delusion has fallen away, and for a moment we've experienced something radically different. Right? Just think. It could be a moment in meditation when sort of everything just falls away and things are just perfectly as they are. or it can be a time in nature, or, I mean, do you know what I'm saying? It could be all kinds of circumstances. Some people who take psychedelic drugs report having experiences like this, where all of a sudden for a moment, or moments, everything falls away, and they're in this place where everything is perfect, just as it is. And they're looking around, and it's all perfect. Right? It's the same world. What's changed? Our minds have changed. You know, the coverings have fallen away, and we can see things very purely. And I think that's what's happened here, and that's why he said everybody at that time, all 32,000 were now hell-bent on the path to enlightenment. Because for that moment, the Buddha revealed the truth of the awakened state. That's really what he's revealing, the truth of the awakened state. And in that moment, people were going, that is wondrous. That is wondrous. Right. And the 84,000 living beings were devoted to the grandeur of that Buddha field, having understood that all things are by nature magical creations of the mind, all conceived in their minds a spirit of unexcelled, totally perfect enlightenment. That's the first chapter. So you can see it begins with grandeur. It begins, it's like, what's it like? It's like, you know, it's like, if you could, like the universe. What do we know about the universe? Is the universe just what we can see? No. This is like nothing. The universe is endless, boundless. It just goes on and on and on and on and on. Endless worlds, endless universe. I mean, there's no end to it. It has no beginning, it has no end. It's just unbelievable, right? I mean, we might be living in like, you know, a fingernail. And then do you ever see these kind of images of what goes on in our body? It looks very much like space, doesn't it? I mean, like these incredible cells and tissues, you know, if you look at them, right? Like we don't see that, do we? We don't see the miracle, the big picture. We see this, right? We say it's Trump versus Harris. Like that's where we're stuck, right? We don't see like that what goes on here is immaterial to the vast unfolding of the universe. Is that true? So this sutra starts big. You see how big it is? It's like, you know, I mean, like we think one Buddha, 84,000, showed up. All these enlightened beings and these gods and these, and you see, I mean, and miraculous things are happening, right, beyond the imagination. I was reading this earlier and I was thinking, when I was a kid, I don't know if everybody knows, there were like books like Tom Swift or Flash Gordon. We used to read these science, like people flying. I mean, if you had talked to somebody 100 years ago about people flying, miraculous, right? Like sending sound, like how does the sound get into the box? It's a miracle. Do you know what I'm saying? All these things that we take for granted are miracles, right? We don't understand how they work. I mean, wireless. It's miraculous, right? It's like there's nothing there, and then all of a sudden there's sound. Or I can talk to you. I can talk to somebody in China like they're next door to me. Like 50 years ago, who would have imagined that? So there may be things that we can't imagine. because our minds are very small. So maybe there are many, many worlds, and many, many worlds that coexist in time and space. Who knows? Could be, couldn't it? Anyhow. So the setting is this miraculous, unending universe, where there are just worlds where the Dharma resonates, or all these hundreds of thousands of enlightened beings just practicing the Dharma and teaching and working for the benefit of beings, right? That's like the big picture. Is that clear? Now, this is chapter 2. At that time, in the great city of Vasali, so now we're like back to what? Earth. Is that clear? We're back to Earth, right? We're back to, right now, in the city of Vasali, there was a certain Lichavi. His name was Vimalakirti. He had served the ancient Buddhas. He had generated lots of roots. He had penetrated the profound way of the Dharma. He was liberated through the transcendence of wisdom. He integrated his realization with skill in liberative technique. This means the technique of liberating beings from their sufferings, from their delusions. That's called, this chapter is called Inconceivable Skill in Liberative Technique. Liberative technique is upaya. It is like the special manifestation of the enlightened mind. It manifests with an ability to liberate people from their delusions, to free them from their sufferings. So that is a great skill. That is a great kind of wisdom that enlightened beings have. See, in our world, we use our intelligence to what? Make money. Invent new creative ways of making more money. You know what I'm saying? Or making new machines, or making better ways to, do laundry or something. Or better ways to kill each other. I mean, this is where we use our intelligence. Is that true? This is a realm where people use their wisdom and intelligence to free people from their suffering. So this is a different context in which these sutras are telling their story. So since he's integrated his realization with skill in liberative technique, he was an expert in knowing the thoughts and actions of beings. He knew the strength and weakness of their faculties. He was gifted with unrivaled eloquence. He taught the Dharma appropriately to each. So he just didn't get up there and lecture. He interacted with beings and he taught them according to who they were and where their faculties were. That was his skill. He lived with the deportment of a Buddha, and his superior intelligence was wide as the ocean. He was praised. Now, so he's this great Buddha, this great enlightened figure. In order to develop living beings with his skill in liberative technique, he lived in the great city of Vasali. Okay? Vasali was his what? His Buddha field. Every bodhisattva has to have a field, like every farmer needs a field. If you're a farmer but you have nowhere to grow anything, you don't need ground, what kind of farmer can you be? You can't be a farmer. You need a land. You need land to work, to grow things. So bodhisattvas need sentient beings, a universe of sentient beings to liberate. This is their field. So what was Vimalakirti's field? Vasali. This is where he was working. Now we'll learn a little bit about him. Remember, in the Hinayana, the ideal is the Arhat, the pure renunciate, remember? Nothing to do with the world, renounces it. Now listen to Vimalakirti. His wealth was inexhaustible. He was a very wealthy man. But it said his wealth was inexhaustible for the purpose of sustaining the poor and the helpless. Great wealth, but he used it to benefit others. He observed pure morality. Why? To protect the immoral. Oh, he just didn't do it for himself. He wanted to protect the immoral, show them another way. He maintained tolerance and self-control in order to reconcile beings who were angry, cruel, and violent and brutal. So he was tolerant to all beings. He had great self-control. He didn't give vent. He didn't act out. He didn't say anything that was not beneficial. He blazed with energy in order to inspire people who were lazy. He maintained concentration, mindfulness, and meditation in order to sustain the mentally troubled, meaning us. He attained decisive wisdom in order to sustain the foolish, which is us. So is that clear? So as opposed to the Arhat, who is developing all these capacities, spiritual capacities, primarily for their own benefit, you can see each of these spiritual faculties he's developing is always to be of benefit to others, which is really the heart of the inspiration of the Bodhisattva, that everything we do, everything we develop is not just for us, it's so we can be of benefit to beings. So this is Vimalakirti. He wore the white clothes of a layman, and yet he lived impeccably like a religious devotee. He lived at home but remained aloof from the realm of desire. He had a son, a wife, he had female attendants, yet he was always continent. He appeared to be surrounded by servants, and yet he lived in solitude. He wore ornaments, he ate and drank. He seemed to eat and drink, but always took true nourishment from the taste of meditation. He made his appearances in the fields of sport and casinos, but his aim was always to mature those people who were attached to games and gambling. He was open to the mundane and transcendental sciences, practices, but he always took great pleasure in the delights of Dharma. He mixed in all crowds, yet was respected as foremost of all. In order to be in harmony with people. I mean, is this clear? He didn't set himself apart. He entered all aspects of life, but it was never for his own benefit or his own pleasure or his own. He always did it, how can I be of help? How can I demonstrate something to these people? Right? He wanted to be in harmony. He associated with elders, with those middle-aged, with those young. Yet he always spoke in harmony with the Dharma. He engaged in all sorts of businesses, yet he had no interest in profit or possessions. To help living beings who would appear at crossroads on street corners. To protect them, he participated in government. Interesting. To protect sentient beings. He must have known about politicians, right? So he would get involved in government to protect people from the rapaciousness of politicians. To develop children, he visited all the schools. To demonstrate the evils of desire, he even entered brothels. To establish drunkards in correct mindfulness, he went to all the cabarets. It's true. He was honored as the businessman among businessmen because he demonstrated the priority of the Dharma. He was honored as the landlord among landlords because he renounced the aggressiveness of ownership. He was honored as the aristocrat among aristocrats because he suppressed pride, vanity, arrogance. He was honored as the official among officials because he regulated the functions of government according to the Dharma. Do you have a sense? Thus lived Lichavi, Vimalakirti in the great city of Vasali, endowed with an infinite knowledge of skill in liberative technique. So this is a very powerful teaching. Okay. He could live in the midst of all the delusive forces, right? He could live among all the objects of desire. He can move within realms where their minds were covered with greed or anger or avarice or power hungry or lust. You know what I mean? He could move into all those realms, and he was not what? Touched. He was not touched by any of it. And not only was he not touched in it, he could always maintain his discernment and his discriminating wisdom to be of help to people. So you're getting a sense now of why this sutra was so loved, because it actually shows us, lay people, how to do it. You see? How to do it. So many people think, well, if I could only go off to a retreat center, if I could only go here, only go there, then I could be a good practitioner, right? But you see, he did it right where? Right in the midst of life. Right? It didn't matter where in life. He would always show up with the same noble mind. And so this really cuts through all our sense of how we should be or how we shouldn't be, or do you understand? It's like wherever we are, in whatever situation we're with whatever people. I mean, he was with brutal people, right? Angry, cruel, violent, and brutal people. He always maintained tolerance and self-control. So it's in all these situations that we have the capacity of developing ourselves. Now, why was he able to do this? Because he was awake. And we'll learn more about awakening as the sutra goes on. So there he is. And then the drama begins, because he manifests sickness. So let me stop now. Any questions? Online? I mean, any questions about any of this? This great sutra, you see? So we went from this grand, universe of manifesting Buddhas where all the sounds, to somebody who's actually living it and practicing it right in the midst of a big city, in the midst of the totality of, what is called the, what is it called? The full catastrophe, right? The full catastrophe of worldly life. He's manifesting it right in the full catastrophe. And wherever he shows up, he's the best. Not like he's the best, but I mean, he just shows up in a noble way no matter where he is. So any questions? Pretty clear? All right, so we have a few more minutes. We can get into it. So now it begins. So we have the Buddha over here in the garden, right? With this great assembly, right? Talking on very high level things. And then we have Vimalakirti, who's not there. He's at home, right? And he manifests himself as sick. His body is manifesting as sick. Now, to inquire after his health, the king, the officials, the lords, the aristocrats, they're all coming to see him, the invalid. Now, pay attention. So all these people are coming to what? How are you doing? Or to be consoling, or is there anything I can do for you, right? You know how people come, or maybe we go to console the sick, right? And usually if we're sick, we'll say what? Yeah, I'm not feeling too well. When we go through all our symptoms and all the things that have been bothering us, right? Tell them the whole story. And everybody been sick and know how we love to go on and on about our symptoms. So all these different kinds of youth, aristocrats, household, businessmen, town folk, country folk, thousands of beings, they're all coming into the city, pouring into the city because they all love Vimalakirti and they hear he's sick, right? They want to see what's going on with him. When they arrived, Vimalakirti taught them the Dharma, even in his sickbed. And he goes, friends, I won't read the whole thing, but friends, this body is so impermanent, fragile, unworthy of confidence. It's feeble, it's insubstantial, perishable, short-lived, painful, filled with diseases, subject to changes. Thus, my friends, this body is only a vessel of many sicknesses. Because of that, wise people do not rely on it. Have you ever visited any sick person who gave you that kind of talk? Take a good look at what's going on with me. Don't rely on your body for anything substantial. It's only gonna disappoint you. Why? Because it's a magnet for suffering. It's impermanent, insubstantial. Yeah, and then he goes on to say, don't rely on it. The body's like a ball of foam, unable to bear any pressure. It's like a water bubble, not remaining very long. It's like a mirage, born from the appetites of the passions. It's like the trunk of a plantain tree, having no core. It's a magical illusion consisting of falsifications. It's ownerless, being the product of a variety of conditions. It's inert like the earth. And he goes on and on. It is inanimate. It is insensate. It's afflicted by the 404 diseases. It's like an ancient well constantly overwhelmed by old age. Its duration is never certain. Certainly, it will only end in death. Therefore, you should despair of your physical body and only arouse your admiration for the body of the Tathagata, the body of the Dharma, the body of wisdom. The body of the Buddha is the stores of merit and wisdom. It is born of morality, meditation, wisdom. It's born of love, compassion, joy. Is that clear? I mean, now we know what to do when people come to visit us when we're sick. You know, there was a great Zen master, when he died and all his disciples, were gathered around him. You know what he said to them? He said, look, this is death. Look, this is what's going to happen to all of you. Wake up. Those were his final admonition to his students. Like, this is the teaching. They came for what? Wise words. The final wisdom of the teacher. And the best way he could help them, he said, look, this is it. This is what's going to happen to you. Don't cling to it. At any time, this is going to happen to you. So, what Vimalakirti is showing is there is our physical body, which you've just heard a little bit of what he says about it, but yet there is this body of the mind, right? The body of all the wonderful attributes that the mind can develop. And this, because it's of the mind, is a body that doesn't perish. The body is physical. It will perish. Mind is immaterial. You see, the physical body is material. It is subject to sickness, old age, and death. It is subject to change. But this true nature of our mind is immaterial, right? So the imprints we make in that mind will continue. So he's saying, this body, doesn't matter how good you take care of it, right? All the things we do to keep it healthy. We eat right, we exercise. We dress it, we wash it. In the end, it what? It's going to what? It's going to disappoint us, right? Because it's impermanent. It's just subject to endless change. But this mind, which can be steadfast, can be strong, has a degree of solidity to it, even though it's immaterial, that will last and will benefit us no matter what goes on with our physical body. So this is the way Vimalakirti talks to people who come to inquire about his illness. Okay, so just remember that next time you hear he's sick. The body of the Buddha, the Tathagata, is born of innumerable good works. Toward such a body you should turn your aspirations. And in order to eliminate the sicknesses of the delusive passions of all living beings, you should conceive the spirit of unexcelled, perfect enlightenment. So this final point he makes, we'll just close our eyes, okay? Is this true, what we've been hearing tonight? I mean, at the end of the day, we have to ask, is this true? Is it true that there is a radically different way of conceiving of life? That there's a radically different way of entering all the activities of our life, all the duties and responsibilities of life, and seeing it all as capable of facilitating our transformation and our ability to benefit all beings? Is that true? Is it true that an ideal like Vimalakirti can be inspirational to me wherever I am in life? Can this inspire me? Can I say, yeah, I would love to look at all these various realms and people and situations that I'm involved in. Wouldn't it be wonderful if in all those various places and realms and relationships I could be of help to all of them, no matter where I show up, to bring benefit? Is it true that the purpose of life is really to create a Buddha body and not just endlessly take care of a physical body that is fundamentally flawed by its impermanence and its fragility? Is that true? I mean, just ask yourself, based on your own life, your own life situation, history, as well as, we certainly, being alive, whether we're young or old, we certainly have great opportunity to observe the lives of others. Is this true? Because again, at the end of this, conceiving the spirit of unexcelled perfect enlightenment. In Mahayana Buddhism, and this, there's a word for it, I can't remember the Sanskrit word, but there's a word for when this concept of wanting to be enlightened and liberated and free in order to benefit beings, that when that concept is first born, seriously born within our mind stream, that is considered a very significant moment. Do you know what I mean? It's sort of like some people say, yeah, I knew it, 8 years old, you know. What does Indra say she wants to be? I have a 5-year-old what does she want to be? A bone doctor or something? I don't know where she got it from. She wants to be, it's like a bone doctor or something. I mean, not just a doctor, a bone doctor. You know, who knows? 30 years from now, you know, it could manifest. But you know what I'm saying? I mean, it's not unknown. All of us might have known, you know, at some point we had some kind of aspiration, you know? Somehow, yeah, this is what I wanted to be, or this is what I wanted to do. And for many of us, you know, that might have directed our life, you know? But usually that's all, you know, worldly aims, so-called. But this is what he's saying. So this is not unknown. But this, in the context of this tradition, that moment when the idea, the concept, the aspiration to wanting to be a bodhisattva, wanting to be awakened to one's true nature, to free oneself of all one's delusions and sufferings, to be totally free and to bring benefit to as many beings as we can, when that thought, it just arises in the mind stream, is considered significant. Because it doesn't arise in most people's mind stream, does it? It's very rare. So if any of us have conceived it in our mind, that aspiration, that's significant. Of course, then we have to nurture so it can grow. But that's the beginning, right? Like many people can say, yeah, I'm here today because 30 years ago, you know, somebody inspired me, or I had this thought that this is what I wanted to do, and here I am, right? So we all know the mind works that way, right? That if one has even just a thought, and if one nurtures it and actualizes it, it will come to fruition, won't it? This is the same. But it's not something we're used to in our culture. Right? If somebody said, if you ran into a young person, they said, well, I don't know exactly what I'm going to do, but I know one thing I want to do. I want to be rich. I've run into kids like that. One thing, yeah, I want to be rich. So, you know, you can have, even being young, have aspirations, right? I want to be a pro basketball player. I mean, people, you know, they have these aspirations when they're young. So just reflect a moment. So we've heard tonight. We ended up in this we began in this very magical realm of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and enlightened beings, and the Buddha teaching inconceivable things and manifesting magical things, and learning about, in a very ideal way, how Bodhisattvas create and purify Buddha realms, you know, all on a very high plane. And now we've come down to earth. We've come down to a city, we've come down to crossroads, we've come down to relationships and vocations and governments and schools and, you know, the whole deal. And we see how a bodhisattva in that context functions. Is that clear? So we've really kind of gone from big picture. But the small picture is the big picture. You know, it is because Vimalakirti has that big picture, he can manifest the way he does day-to-day, experience to experience. He has that in him, right? And now we'll probably stop now, but now the drama will begin. And you'll really enjoy next week, because after he does his sickness, the Buddha, remember he's over there in the garden. He sort of knows what's going on, and sort of Vimalakirti's a good friend of his. And so what we'll get into next week is the Buddha will now ask his leading disciples, "Oh, I want you to go visit Vimalakirti and find out, I hear he's sick, find out what's wrong with him." None of them want to go. And they all relate stories of where anyhow, you'll see. And then he goes to the Bodhisattvas, "Okay, well, Vimalakirti, will you go?" And she tells her story of why they're all scared of Vimalakirti, because he has such incredible insight and wisdom and lives it. So we'll really learn a lot next time. So why don't we stop here? Thank you all. I hope this was enjoyable to you. Listening to the teaching of Vimalakirti, we'll share the merit. Whatever benefit may have come to us this evening from listening and reflecting on the wonderful Sutra of Vimalakirti, may be shared equally with all whom we encounter, whether near or far away, and may its effects ripple continuously to aid in the healing and transformation of the world. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, those in the hall. Thank you, those online, in the whole group who have signed up. It's very diverse. There are people who are probably almost brand new to Buddhist Sutras, and this is like, stepping into a new land. And same way, there are many of you who are very familiar with the Buddhist Sutras. So we have a very diverse group. I tried to teach in a way that was open to everybody and understandable. Thank you, everyone. But if you have questions, please ask them.